like I want to cover as a part of this seminar, like some of the main concerns with peaking bigger athletes. And Darren, I know this is something that you struggle with, in particular with yourself, but I know you've had it with a couple of your athletes that you've put on stage, is like just running away and some of the things that can happen with people that carry a little bit more muscle. So kind of walk us through what you start to see happen when that does kind of come to fruition, and then potentially some solutions that you use to help with like slowing that down and making sure the best look comes to stage. Because like, and you can touch on this some, but like the thing about bigger athletes is that percentage change is a much larger change in the visuals than like someone who is a little bit on the lighter side.
Yeah, 100%. I think the more muscle there is on an athlete, the more scope for loss there is, or more variables there are. I think a lot of it, actually, to touch on from what Alex has said there, is paying attention throughout the prep process, not just waiting till the end. I think too many people just ignore stuff along the way. They're just focusing on fat loss and not looking at the little signs. So you should really be, the mock peak, as what people say, is starting from the very beginning, seeing sort of trends in what the body is doing relative to sort of food. And obviously early on, whatever, when someone's carrying a bit more body fat, they may not drop as much, but you need to know sort of a ballpark of where someone needs to eat, how much water they need, how much sodium they need, and be prepared for that. Because I think any of my athletes who are watching this, or anyone who's worked with me, will know I always say, we need to be ready 2 to 3 weeks out. That's our date we're ready for. Yeah. Because your peak isn't about doing a load of magic. It's not about manipulating a load of things. For me, the peak is about reducing fatigue and reducing stress. That's all it is, because you should know, once you're in shape, you should know how much sort of food, how much sort of water, how much sodium by a certain time that athlete needs going into stage. And if you know all of that stuff, it's not really going to get away from you. But ultimately, if things start running away from you, it's going to be down to water, sodium, or food. And you don't panic in those situations. It's just pull things back, rest, put a little more food in, put a little more water in, and try and get things back up.
Now, I want to pose this to you, Darren, because I do think this contributes to being able to manage that back end a bit better. And Alex alluded to this, was like timeline setting. Like, how important of a role is that timeline setting in regards to making sure these athletes make it in time? Because like when we start to tie this bow of like the things that lead into peak week, ultimately, like that's going to make the final decision of like what happens. So like, how important is that timeline setting process? And like, how is it that you go about like setting those for athletes, as far as like how much wiggle room you give or anything like that, when you kind of do look at timelines for
it's extremely important. I think you need to have a sort of a ballpark sort of figure out where you need to be and work back from there. So if you, like with any athlete, you can kind of, I think we can all agree, you can look at them where they are now, and you can roughly estimate, where their weight needs to be for stage. Well, if they're a weight class athlete, exactly.
Especially, yeah.
But you kind of work back from there, and you work out a rate of loss. I kind of go on the more tentative side of like 1 to 1.5%. Yeah. That gives me my number of weeks, but I set that number of weeks at 3 weeks out from the show date.
Yeah.
And I allow myself that wiggle room of those 3 weeks. If something goes wrong, if someone gets sick during prep, it's happened to me, get sick, something, you lose a week or two, at least that then you're not chasing your ass, leading into those final weeks.
Yeah. And if you're leaning on that 1 to 1.5 side, you're probably giving yourself actually like 4.5 extra weeks, right? Because you're not going to have a rate of loss the whole time. So yeah.
100%.
And I think one of the cool things about like J3U Coaching is all of us are nerds in our own right at some stage, right? So we each have this sheet on the back end that we can map out rate of loss. At each rate of loss that we like to track, it's like 0.5, 1, and 1.5 to see over that time duration of that timeline we build for each athlete we work with, like just where does starting prep make the most sense, so that we're not guessing, right? We're not guessing based off visuals. We're not guessing based off just when does someone feel like the magic moment to start prep is. It's data driven and it's objective in nature. And I think that that's where I love our team so much, is just like, and especially like with, with these bigger athletes that we have on the team, like it just makes this process so predictable. Because I tend to see it, and I know you guys do too, is like bigger athletes run away from you more, the more fatigued they are coming into those last few weeks. Right. And so if you can manage the front end of that prep, where like phase 1 of prep is 1.5% rate of loss, phase 2 is 1%, and that last phase is like 0.5 to 0.3. It's like, man, that slower rate of loss on the back end, where we're more likely to lose tissue, leaves that athlete in a better place coming into the peak testing and the actual peak week. So